Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another video. Today, I am going to be talking to a dear colleague, Tracy Quinlan from Canada. So Tracy was one of our wonderful contributors to Australia's astrology guide for 2022, so Wellbeing Astrology Guide. So Tracy wrote an article for us all about Pallas Athena. So Pallas Athena is one of the asteroids that are commonly used in astrology. So Tracy, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about this asteroid and, what sort of, inspired you to write about this particular body in the sky.
Well, so Pallas Athena, there's the four goddess asteroids that tend to get clumped together. And I came upon her quite accidentally. I was a noob astrologer and had gone to this little conference. And I didn't even bring my chart, totally, newbie move. You don't bring your natal chart. So somebody had brought my chart up for me. And there was this glyph I'd never seen because I hadn't studied any of that. And the lecture was, what was your most elevated body?
Right.
And what that tell you about your career? And here I had this glyph conjunct my midheaven. And I thought, so and it was Pallas. So when I got home, I did all this research and I came across, and I don't know where, I couldn't find it a second time if I tried, but a website that went through Pallas through the signs. And what it said for Pallas and Sag, which I have, was, feminism and tend to have strong opinions about social issues. And whatever it said it very much resonated. And I had to do a project. And I thought, well, I'm pretty sure that I can find a really strong pattern of Pallas in, the charts of famous feminists. That was my aim. Well, I found absolutely no pattern and was about to give up. And I thought, well, what if I looked up kind of my idea of an anti-feminist? And so I looked up Hugh Hefner. Oh, wow. And he had Pallas in Cancer in the 10th house. And then for some reason, I looked up Pam Anderson, and she had Pallas in Cancer in the 1st. I thought, well, that's fascinating because he made money off of women's boobs, and she made money off her own cancer breasts.
I remember. I have to check where my Pallas is. I remember when I was a teenager, we were at the dinner table, and I don't know what we were talking about as a family, but my brother sort of referred to mine. He goes, "You're not Pamela Anderson, and then he kind of revealed that he had this Pamela Anderson thing. Back in the 90s, we were all watching Baywatch, I guess. So yeah, Pallas in Cancer would be the boobs for sure.
Well, and what's interesting is that Pamela Anderson actually is quite an activist.
Definitely, yeah. She's an animal activist, isn't she?
Big time, yeah. Absolutely. And so that kind of took me down a different path. And then I sort of started finding these interesting patterns, like, Billie Jean King has Pallas in Aries, and she started a whole organization for women in sport, and so it just kind of grew from there. And I found it was this really intuitive process where, I don't remember who came first, but I think it was Margaret Atwood, who has Pallas in Leo, which is all about dramatizing, talking about your causes through drama. Yeah. And then I thought, well, I wonder where George Orwell's is. And they both have Pallas in Leo. And I thought, well, that's such an interesting commonality, because there was really no other commonality in their charts. Both these dystopian authors that tend to dramatize social issues. So, and down there I went, and it just every time I revisit the material, I have another new discovery. So, for India, when we were supposed to be doing the India conference, I thought, well, I should find a chart that's local, and found this fantastic man named Vijay Sin, who has had, to date, that was a couple of years ago now, had the longest sit-in, over 35 years, I want to say, a very, very long time anyways. And Pallas in his chart makes a fixed Grand Cross.
Oh, wow.
Right? And so he's been actually sitting in on property rights, and it's in Taurus. The stories are they're really quite amazing, and she just doesn't ever really disappoint. Yeah. Situation, and Lisa Shine was talking about something, and Ida B. Wells came up, and I don't know if you know the story of Ida B. Wells. She's American, and she was kicked off a train for being Black, right? And she was first class train, and she got kicked off, and she, from that point on, became quite a busy activist for equal rights.
Yeah. Earlier this year, I read a book called Black Fortunes, and I'm pretty sure she was featured sort of like America's First Black Millionaires. Very interesting book. And I'm pretty sure her name was featured in that book, or one of the stories around it. Yeah.
Well, and so as Lisa was describing her, the traits that she was giving her were quite Libran.
Right.
And I thought, well, it's interesting because there's nothing in Libra in her chart. And so right away, I'm like, where's Pallas? Pull up my phone. And sure enough, she has Pallas in Libra, finishing a T-square to her chart ruler and her moon and Mars.
Yeah.
And then on the day that happens with the train, she's having this major Pallas transit. So it's just like, she just does really pop up and activate, and really interesting that it, like I said, she really doesn't usually disappoint.
Wow. Yeah. So it's one of those go-to asteroids when you're working with clients or doing research projects, or?
So when I'm working with clients, usually first time you don't really need to add asteroids. There's enough information in the charts. But if I'm looking for remediation, sometimes I'll pull it up, because going and doing work for a cause can be a really powerful way to remediate, especially if she's making contact to a difficult part of the chart.
Yeah.
I had a client who had moved to Canada from China because he wanted to come out, and there's just no way, as the oldest son, that was going to be possible in his family, in his country. And he had Saturn conjunct Pallas, square the sun. Like, it was quite yeah. And so I said, if you put yourself in the position to help others who have the same struggle, it's the first thing I did when I moved to Edmonton. And it was the most healing thing he could have possibly done. So she can be really helpful that way, to give people kind of a direction to go put some of that energy.
Yeah.
That's when I'll pull her up.
Yeah. So I'm not really, asteroids are not my forte. So if you were to perhaps liken Pallas Athena to like a Mars, another planet, would you say like maybe a Mars? Because you were sort of saying, it's like, speaking of activism, or maybe fighting for a cause or things like that. So would you say that perhaps she has a little bit more of a Martian style of energy, or would you tend to read her purely by sign placement or aspect in a birth chart?
She's like Mars with a cause.
Right. Like the altruistic type of Mars, in a sense?
I wouldn't necessarily say altruistic.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. The examples that I use for Pallas and Capricorn are Dr. Oz and Deepak Chopra.
Right.
And what I found that interesting, again, the only thing they shared in common in their charts was that placement. And they're both, people who went into alternative health but became doctors first. And so it's not really altruistic, but what they wanted to do is change the system from within the system.
Yeah.
Interesting. It kind of gives it more of, now I've lost my words, something to fight for that's important. And not necessarily altruistic, because it can be like, you look at Hugh Hefner.
Hugh Hefner,
yeah. Definitely, there's nothing, that guy, nothing altruistic about him. And so, but he's a good example of Pallas being a cause, because if you read his earlier writings, he really, really, really didn't like women and really didn't trust the institution of marriage. And when he started Playboy, it was to actually fight against the institution of marriage. So it does actually play into a cause. It swears Venus, the ruler of his seventh.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So not altruistic, but still he had a mission and a cause, right?
Yeah. It's sort of like, it sounds like Pallas is a bit of a change agent. Like if it's triggered or activated, it's like, well, these are the confines from which I'm working with, but I want to change that in some way.
Yeah. And often in the charts where, they've gotten quite far on their mission, she is making aspects to Mars.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Often a soft aspect to Pluto or a hard aspect to Mars.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Christina Rodenbeck is her last name, I think, right? The Oxford astrologer.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
So she does quite a bit of work with the asteroids, and what she's found with Pallas is when she's in conjunction. So she's looked at totally different charts and kind of from a different angle. And again, there has to be a strong connection to the natal planets, but she's noticed it with the conjunction. So
yeah. And so they're activated by transits and other timing techniques as well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a time when Leonardo DiCaprio came to our province because he wanted to see for himself what we were doing with our tar sands. And he wanted to be, because he has an organization to save the earth, right? He wants
Correct.
to, yeah. And so I was looking, and the day that he came here and he flew up there, Pallas was sitting on his ascendant. Yeah.
So that reminds me of another question I had for you about this particular asteroid. What's her rate of speed? Like, how fast does she move in the sky through signs?
She's every 4.5 years through a sign.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's 4.5 years.
Okay. So it's almost like I guess a secondary progressed lunar phase.
Yeah, she's just
sort of
a little
time frame. Yeah.
Just a little bit than that.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, kind of like feeding back into like maybe a sort of a feminine archetype, with that sort of, like loosely connected to a moon phase. Of course, that would depend on your own moon pace, like the speed of the moon in your birth or at your birth. So do you happen to know off the top of your head, like where she is placed now and how that might be feeding into some of the current zeitgeist of
that would have been a thing for me to check ahead of time, wouldn't it? Oh my God.
No. Does Solar Fire bring it up? I'll see if
it does.
Okay.
And I have Solar Fire up, so I can actually, if I add her there. Oh, she's in Libra right now. No,
okay.
That's not.
No.
Let me tell you. Oh, she's in Pisces. The moon is actually right.
Oh, so there we go. And he were talking about her today. Just as Jupiter is about to come and go. Oh, hi. So that's really interesting. So so do you know what degree she is in Pisces right now? 11. So Jupiter's going to come and kind of connect to that really soon. So, do you do like transit watching with this, as she's activated in the sky? Is that something you can, is that something that you could perhaps so I have to ask you all the questions because this is not something I work with. So, from a transit tracking perspective, like, would you expect to see, major planets activating the asteroid sort of show peaks in sort of maybe different forms of social activism, or her energy comes through in some ways?
Yeah, absolutely. So a good example of her being busy is when Harvey Weinstein was finally arrested.
Wow.
Actually, all 4 goddesses were connecting to very important points of his chart, which was really interesting. That because I think they were farming T-square, something like it was quite busy with all the girls, and his chart was really being hit with all of them. Wow. And when the really, really big Me Too march happened, Pallas was quite active at that time as well.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I want to say Aries, but I don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head. But yeah, absolutely. If there's anything to do with some kind of a cause, she's usually quite connected to something that, like, she doesn't operate on her own. She needs to be attached to a planet. Right. And so, yeah, she'll usually be connected to Mars or Pluto or.
Interesting how you brought up like the Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too and all of that kind of stuff, because obviously there's a very big trial happening in New York that's being kind of blanketed out right now. And Ghislaine Maxwell, I'm not sure if I've pronounced her name right, but obviously sort of one of the, I think, poster child situations of the current Venus-Pluto dynamic that's happening in the sky. So I'm just thinking about her birth chart and how the current placement of Pallas might be playing into it. She's Gemini rising. I think it's 12 degrees. So Pallas will be, making that overcoming square to the position of her ascendant. Her MC falls in the 9th in Aquarius, but she does have sort of Pallas right at the top of her chart right now. So there's so much going on with her chart. I'm keeping an eye on what's going on here, but obviously this is a new angle I've not kind of seen before. So, obviously, Pallas moving through Pisces is not a regular event either. So this is, like not something that happens to your 10th house all of the time, right?
Right. Pallas is gentle in Pisces, though. So I wonder if they go easy on her.
Yeah, this is what it kind of looks like. You know what I mean? Like, because I think she's the accessory I don't know, who knows, right? But
herself, pardon? Was she groomed first? Like, did he groom her first?
Oh, look, I think when you look at her background, her childhood, some of the questionable things that might have happened to her, there's definitely that pattern there. So, obviously not an excusable thing, but you can usually it's the abused that abuse. And so we can sort of see that kind of patterning going on there. So,
to see what angle they might kind of be able to come in on if it happened to her, right? That gentleness and that wanting to maybe be more altruistic towards her, that Pallas energy might actually benefit her as opposed to hold her task.
Yeah, but it's definitely so thank you for shedding that, having
let me add a layer though, because in the myth she's the betrayer of women.
Oh, well, that's pretty much what she's done.
To this woman's chart, she's probably helping rather than hurting.
Wow, far out. This is what I mean. As I said, I don't work with asteroids, but I really love like the stories and the mythology behind them, and that kind of really sort of makes them come alive. I actually had an astrologer colleague, friend of mine, Drew Levanti. He made mention of a particular asteroid that I have in my chart, and I was like, oh, there it is. So sometimes they just, especially if they can join something like really potent, like they do just bring another interpretive layer. So they're, even if you're like myself and definitely err on the traditional side, don't be afraid to kind of explore some of the myths or look at the possibilities of these asteroids, because, particularly if they make tight conjunctions, just like a fixed star, they're definitely going to add just a really sort of really insightful and illuminating layer of interpretation. So with that, I'm assuming you also work with the other four, because there's 4 major asteroids together, isn't there?
Vesta, Juno, and Ceres.
Yeah.
And I don't in the same way that I do Pallas. How I will use them though is I'll bring them in and look to see if they're making important connections in the chart, especially say somebody's asking about relationships and Juno or Vesta are doing something significant in terms of the 7th house, maybe something problematic. What I'll ask them to do is go research that myth for themselves, and see, and then come back and tell me what they got from it. And it's interesting the rabbit holes people go down and the that they make and some of the comparisons I would prefer they'd make the comparison to their life rather than me.
Yeah, of course, and I guess it stands to reason that if Pallas is conjoined your midheaven, she's your pet project for sure, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in your article, you've also, given descriptions of each of the sign placements of Pallas. So, you can look up which sign you've got your Pallas in and sort of, see if that kind of resonates to obviously the sign vibe and the particular house in your birth chart. So all of that information is in this book. It is a bit difficult to get if you're overseas, but if you are keen for a hard copy, please just connect with me via my website, and I can give you information. I can send that out to you. I'll also pop links in the show notes for how you can get a digital copy. So if you don't want to wait for the snail mail in the midst of a global pandemic and logistical issues, oh my Lord, you can just get straight in and get your digital copy as well. So I'll put all the links on how you can get a copy of Tracy's fabulous article and explore some new insights around your birth chart. So what have you got coming up? What are you doing? Tell us about what you're doing in astrology, how you even found it. We didn't even do that at the start. So how did you get into astrology?
Well, so back to I actually have been in love with astrology since I was a teenager. And a friend brought a giant astrology book. I don't even know which one it was. And we
Was
sat
it that big birthday book? Was it maybe? No,
it actually taught us how to hand draw our
wow. Yeah.
We actually hand drew our charts,
Yeah.
Which I never remembered how to do. But when I had my chart done by a professional a few years later, I had done it correctly. So that was, heartening. Anyways, but I was a hairstylist for years and got to a point, where my knees just did not want to do that anymore. And I thought, what could I do that I love that doesn't need to stand? And then my next thought was astrology. And my next thought was, well, if that's meant to be, there'll be something coming up. And I punched in Astrology Conference Alberta. And in 10 days was this little conference that I went to where I discovered Pallas. And that was that. That was kind of, and I had taken a few classes with Chris McRae. I knew the basics and off I went. That was the beginning.
Yeah. I love that when the student is ready, the teachers appear. Especially with the Sagittarius midheaven, right?
It's so true.
I love it. Yeah.
So I have some classes coming up after Christmas. And I will be doing a class that involves like looking at Chiron and looking at the 4 asteroids and teaching kind of the peripheral stuff, the nodes, things. It's a follow-up to my introductory class. And then following that, I'm going to do a synthesizing class. So actually more of a workshop for 10 weeks to go through the process. I find that so many people come to me and they're like, well, I know the basics, but now what do I do with it?
Yeah, it's the weaving of the tapestry is the
practice, right?
It is. Yeah. Yeah, I always sort of talk about the 2 levels of learning astrology. And I think the bulk of us are used to just the information soaking and sort of the regurgitation of that. And then you hit this grappling point when you've got to get the philosophical with the technical and all of that sort of stuff. But it's really the application is where we can guide students, but it's really up to them to sort of practice it and develop their own voice or their own way. And it's like astrology really is an apprenticeship.
Forever. Like it doesn't.
Really I'm just learning about Pallas after 20 years.
I always think like, so I have Jupiter conjunct Uranus conjunct Mercury and a Virgo sun.
Yeah.
And Jupiter rules my axis, right? My ascendant, my midheaven. And so like astrology is perfect. Jupiter also rules my 9th, is perfect because I'm never going to run out of information.
And you're never going to get bored.
I'm never going to know ever.
Yeah, I have Jupiter conjoined my ascendant in Gemini, so I get you. It's like the ability to combine the small and the large all in one kind of like hot mess. Or maybe mine's a bit messier than yours, because your Jupiter's in Virgo, did you say? Is it Virgo?
Oh, my Jupiter's in Libra.
Oh, Libra.
Mercury Uranus conjunction in Libra.
Ah, there we go. Yeah. So, but yeah, all of those sort of Jupiter flavors coming through. Well, it's been fantastic to have this chat, and I'm a bit excited to go and explore where my Pallas is right now and see if it tells the same story that Vesta did. Well, like Vesta was like, oh yeah, like I get this now, so I'll have to go and check that out. So in some of the free softwares online, like astro.com, I think AstroSeek is another popular one nowadays. Are asteroid placements available in those? Do you know? Or I think
on astro.com, I'm pretty sure. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So if you don't have SolarFire or other astrological software and you're really curious about the placement of your Pallas, you can always just astro.com it, and you should be able to access that there. I think once you start using SolarFire or other programs, you sort of forget what's available on the internet. So yeah, there's definitely will be resources and what have you out there. Do you have any blogs or articles about Pallas on your website or anything like that?
I actually had a lecture, and I've taken it down, and I will put it back up when it is polished. So that'll be available, in January.
Well, there you go. Yep. Some New Year resolutions for you. Discover your Pallas. Well, again, Tracy, thank you for this wonderful and illuminating piece of work. Hopefully it helps to open some new avenues of astrology for professionals and enthusiasts alike. And, thanks for coming on and having a chat with me and telling all the people about Pallas. So what's your website? Consult the Sky, is it?
Yep, consultthesky.com.
Fantastic. Yep. So we'll put a link to that so people can access it. And what about your social medias? Where can people find you on that?
All of them are under Consult the Sky in one or another.
Yeah. So just on the regulars, I guess, Instagram.
On Twitter, Instagram, on Facebook.
Excellent. Well,
Pinterest will start pretty soon too.
So. Pinterest. Oh, wow. Yeah. I'm just looking to really kind of streamline and reduce my social media presence. It's just such hard work, isn't it?
I'm just shifting. Yeah. Facebook has just gotten ridiculously useless.
Hasn't it? Yeah. I don't even really engage with it much anymore. I know it's a bit of a mess. Anyway, it's this air element really taking over now, like this sort of mutation and spreading out of, rather than being in this centralized, Facebook world. We're all, finding our place out there in the digital ethers. But anyway, you've got a website. And what about a newsletter? Do you have an email thing where people can?
Sure do. Yeah. If you go to my contact page on my website, there's a big star. And if you click on it, you can sign up for the newsletter. I do a full moon and new moon newsletter. So twice a month.
Oh, great.
Tidbits of things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely vital in this day of social media censorship and algorithm control. Always get into the email. It's always the best way to find your favorite people. Okay, well, thanks so much, Tracy. And I wish you a really lovely holiday season and new year as well. So great to connect with you.
You too.
All right, you take care.
You too.